Snow drifted past the window like forgotten prayers. Inside, Jacob patched his son's torn mitten with thread too fine for calloused hands. The kettle hissed, not from heat, but age. The mornings came like echoes now. Not new, not urgent, just returning. Jacob rose before the sun did, the bones in his back creaking in protest as he sat on the edge of the bed he never stopped sharing. One side weighted by memory, the other by his weariness. He washed in cold water, not because the heater was broken, but because it was easier than fixing it. Breakfast was 2 spoons of oats warmed in milk on a stove that clicked twice before it lit. His son Luke, 5 years and 1 winter of grief old, patted in with hair. Doozled and eyes still full of dreams he didn't say aloud. He clung to a blanket with holes the size of coins. He never asked for anything, not since his mother passed. "Eat," Jacob said softly, pushing the bowl forward. Luke nodded. He always nodded. They didn't speak much in the mornings. Not out of anger, just habit. Outside, snow blanketed the fields in a silence deeper than sleep. The barn leaned sideways, tired as the man who built it. Tools lay where they were last used. Jacob worked wood when work came. He was once proud of it. Now the orders came in like breaths held too long. Small repairs, a table leg, a shutter. Enough to keep soup in the pot. And the letters. There was a box in the cupboard with stamps from places that felt like fables. Women from faraway lands, all written in looping cursive and careful phrasing. Most never heard back. One did. Her name was Anya. He found her letter after months of letting the box gather dust. He opened it not because he hoped, but because he couldn't sleep. Her words were unsure. Her sentences walked like someone in church for the first time. But there was something about how she said she liked the sound of rain on windows, how she didn't mind silence. "I have been rejected by 3 families," she wrote. "They wanted children. I cannot give them, but I can cook, I clean. I speak softly. I know how to wait." That was what caught him. I know how to wait. He read it twice, then again. Then he folded it and placed it beside the sink where he could see it in the mornings. 2 weeks later, she stepped off the train into a world made entirely of white. The station was more shed than structure. Just one bench, a rusted sign, and a lantern that buzzed like a dying bee. Anya wore a handmade coat, wool patched at the sleeves, one button too large for its hole. She carried a single suitcase, bound with a leather belt. In her other hand, the letter, his reply, folded into 4, soft at the edges from rereading. Jacob stood with Luke beside him. The boy clung to his leg, peeking from behind the folds of his father's coat. She smiled, not wide, just enough to soften her eyes. "You are Jacob?" she asked. Her accent sang through the cold. He nodded. "This is Luke," he said, motioning. "To the boy." Luke didn't answer, just gripped harder. Anya knelt. "Hello," she whispered, though the wind nearly stole it. "I have come a long way. I brought a scarf for you." From her coat pocket she pulled a woolen scarf, red with tiny birds stitched along the edge. Luke didn't move, but his eyes followed the birds. Jacob reached down, touched Luke's shoulder. "It's all right." Luke took it, slow, like reaching for a wild thing. The drive home was quiet. Snow turned the world to hush. Even the tires sounded like whispers. On the road, Anya watched the trees pass like thoughts too big to speak. She held the letter on her lap the whole time. At the house, Jacob carried her suitcase inside. Luke vanished to the back room. She stood in the doorway, taking in the kitchen with its chipped sink. A single cabinet door hanging crooked, the kettle still steaming faintly. "It is warm," she said, though her breath fogged in front of her. That night she cooked, stew with barley, carrots, something Jacob couldn't name but smelled like cloves and old stories. She moved through the kitchen like she already knew where everything lived, not because she did, but because she was used to making do. Luke sat at the table, staring at the bowl. He didn't touch it. Anya said nothing. She only reached into her bag and pulled out a small wooden icon, Mary and Child, the paint worn at the edges, the gold leaf long faded. She placed it on the sill by the window. Jacob noticed. "My wife. She kept one too." Anya looked down. "Then this house already knows prayer." They ate in the soft rattle of the wind against the glass. When dinner ended, she washed the dishes by hand, dried them with a shirt too soft to be anything but old. Then she laid her thin blanket on the couch without being told. "You can take the room," Jacob offered. "I'm all right here," she said, almost like it was a ritual she'd done before. Luke stood at the doorframe, holding the scarf, not speaking. "Say good night," Jacob said gently. Luke hesitated. Then, "Good night." Anya smiled, not with her lips, but with her whole face. "Good night, Luke." The house creaked like it remembered footsteps that no longer came. Jacob sat at the table after she'd gone to sleep. The lamp cast soft amber over the edges of the letter he unfolded again. "I know how to wait." He traced the words with his finger, as if feeling them would explain them. Outside, snow fell heavier, not in gusts but steady, as though the sky was letting go slowly. He heard the small shuffle of feet. Looked up. Luke stood there, barefoot, the red scarf dragging behind him. He walked to the edge of the table, looked toward the living room where Anya lay, curled small beneath the blanket. "Is she staying?" he asked, barely louder than a breath. Jacob didn't answer. He folded the letter, stared out the window. The snow kept falling. The second morning came with the smell of bread. Jacob woke to birdsong he didn't own. At first he thought it was a dream, until he smelled yeast and warmth and something else. Memory, not his own. He found her in the kitchen. Anya was barefoot, hair tied back with a fraying ribbon, rolling dough with a wine bottle, humming. The tune was unfamiliar, low, Slavic, slow. She moved like she belonged there, not because anyone told her so, but because she had nowhere else to be. The stove hissed happily. The cracked kettle was steaming again, not from neglect, but because she had coaxed it to life. "Morning," he said, voice still hoarse with sleep. Anya turned, wiping her hands on her apron. "I hope you don't mind. I wake early." She had already laid out butter in a chipped dish. A small jar of jam, plum maybe, rested beside it like it had always been there. Jacob nodded, unsure what to say. He didn't remember the last time someone made something just because it was morning. Luke wandered in a few minutes later, rubbing his eyes. He paused in the doorway, surprised. Anya didn't speak. She simply bent and tapped the bench. He came to her. She knelt, pulling his boots to her lap. "May I?" she asked. Luke nodded just once. She tied them neatly, double knots, tucking the ends in like it was sacred. From that day, he waited for her every morning. The days blurred into each other, not out of boredom but peace. Anya planted small green hopes in ceramic pots near the window, herbs and onions, a bean or two. She said they would grow better if spoken to gently. Luke watched her, elbows on the table, fascinated by the small world she was building inside. One morning he brought her a toy horse, wooden, with one leg missing and a crack along its painted mane. "I broke it," he said softly. Anya took it in her hands, examining the wound like a surgeon. "Where did he fall?" "Off the table, when I was mad." She nodded like she understood everything he didn't say. "I will fix him. But he may limp." "That's okay," Luke said. "So does our barn." Jacob saw it all from a distance. He never asked for anything, but began to find things done. The thread on the cabinet fixed, socks mended, firewood stacked straighter. The house no longer echoed when he entered. Anya didn't speak of her past unless invited. Even then, her stories were spare. "I worked in a bakery," she said once. "My father played violin until his fingers curled. We lived near a river that sometimes froze solid enough to walk across." She spoke like she missed things too much to name them. One afternoon, a neighbor dropped off a sack of potatoes and a tin of molasses. Ruth Callahan, sharp-eyed, too friendly. "Well, Jacob," Ruth said loudly, "aren't you lucky to have a woman in the house again? Luke must be thrilled with his new mother." Anya smiled politely, eyes dropped to the hoe. Floor. Jacob cleared his throat. Thank you for the gift, Ruth. When the door closed behind her, the air settled heavy. Anya continued slicing carrots. Carefully. Quietly. Only that night, as the fire dimmed and Luke slept, did she speak. I cannot carry. Jacob looked up from his chair. I was broken young, she said. A sickness, there was bleeding, then nothing. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. He didn't answer, not because he didn't care, but because he understood silence better than sympathy. He stood, picked up a log from the basket, and placed it on the hearth. Then he handed one to her. She stacked it beside his, and the fire burned warmer than it had before. Sometimes at night she took her box of letters from beneath the couch. Not many. Just a few. Postmarked in cities with names like Ash. She read one slowly, lips moving soundlessly. Then folded it once, twice, 4 times, until it disappeared into the flames. Luke walked in, blanket dragging, eyes heavy. What was that? He asked. Anya looked over. Something that doesn't matter now. He nodded like that made sense. Sat beside her. Watched the ashes dance upward like moths. When the fever came, it came fast. Luke woke sweating, cheeks red, breath shallow. Jacob checked his forehead and felt panic coil in his chest like a fist. He hadn't dealt with this since his wife. And even then, he never did it alone. But he wasn't alone now. Anya didn't flinch. She gathered cloths, water, herbs she'd grown in the cracked pots. She brewed something bitter and sweet. She sang in words Jacob didn't know, but recognized anyway. Lullabies in another tongue threaded with comfort. She stayed beside Luke the entire night, wiping his brow, whispering stories about a bear who danced for bread and a boy who grew sunflowers from his sleeves. Jacob stood in the doorway, back pressed to the frame. His hands gripped the wood like it could hold him together. She never left the boy's side. By morning, the fever broke. Luke slept deeply, small and curled like something returned to safety. Anya sat with her hand still on his hair, eyes red-rimmed but calm. She didn't notice when Jacob entered the room fully, didn't flinch when he placed the old quilt, the wedding one, stitched by his wife's mother, over them both. Luke mumbled something in his sleep. Mommy, stay. Anya bowed her head, silent tears falling onto the boy's blanket. Jacob sat on the floor beside them. The fire crackled. The snow outside kept falling, but inside the warmth was no longer borrowed. Spring crept in like an apology. The snow didn't vanish all at once. It shrank, pulled back from fence posts and boots, left behind soggy patches where green dared to peek out. The barn roof still held frost in the mornings, but the afternoons brought birdsong, tentative as if unsure they were allowed. Luke spotted the first crocus near the well. Is it real? He asked. Anya knelt beside him, fingers brushing the pale petals. Yes, she whispered. It's the bravest one. They began digging the soil together, turning it with old tools Jacob had sharpened the week before. Anya showed Luke how to gently press seedlings into place, how to pat the earth like tucking in a child. He copied her exactly, hands dirty, mouth pressed in concentration. This one's for beans, she said. That one's for us, he replied. She laughed, the sound soft and rare. As they worked, she taught him words from her childhood. Zemlya, she said, pressing her hand. To the dirt, earth. Zemlya, he echoed, voice proud. And when the sun hung lower and Jacob called them in, Luke turned back once. Dirt on his face, joy on his lips. Nana, he called. Come on. She froze, just for a moment, then stood, brushing off her apron, and followed him inside. Sunday evenings became sacred, not in a church way, in a warm, candle-lit way. They would clear the table, light a stubby candle in an old teacup, and each would write down one thing they were grateful for. Anya's handwriting was small, slanted. That night she wrote, warmth. Jacob paused longer. His words were blockier. Unsure, he finally wrote, quiet not filled with sorrow. Luke drew instead. A stick figure scene, 3 people with big smiles and stringy arms. Anya turned it around, studying it. "Who's this one?" she asked. He pointed. "You. That's Papa." "Papa?" she asked, surprised. Luke shrugged like it was obvious. "You're both here." Jacob's eyes stayed on the candle. The house filled with little habits. Not routines forced by need, but ones shaped by comfort. Shared glances, matching mugs, socks left on the railing to dry. It wasn't dramatic. Just good. But Jacob carried something quiet inside. Guilt. It came in strange moments. When Anya laughed with Luke and he felt the ache of happiness. When he saw her braid her hair by the fire and had to look away. When he picked up her scarf and almost pressed it to his face before stopping himself. So he carved a spoon. At night in the barn, with his old knife and trembling hands. It was simple, curved, imperfect, with a smooth handle that fit her palm. He meant it to be a gift, a thank you, an unspoken truth. But when it was finished, he couldn't bring himself to give it. What right did he have? His wife had died. He hadn't been enough to save her. Now here was this woman full of quiet kindness, and he was afraid to reach for what he wanted. One night, unable to sleep, he stepped outside. The stars were sharp. Cold gnawed at his jacket. He sat on the porch steps and stared upward, feeling both smaller and heavier than he had in months. Footsteps behind him. Anya didn't speak, just came out with a mug of tea, sat beside him. Her shoulder brushed his once and then didn't move away. They drank in silence, together. Days later, Anya cleaned the shelf where Jacob kept his Bible, not snooping, just dusting. She moved it gently and a paper fluttered out. A letter, her letter. The one she had written months ago, folded small and careful. She held it a moment, then walked to him in the field where he was repairing a fence. He looked up as she approached. "I found it," she said, holding it out. Jacob wiped his hands. Gently. "I didn't answer anyone else," he said. She stared at him. "I couldn't," he added. "But when I read yours, it felt like something was still possible." Anya nodded slowly. "Then," she said softly, "I was already home." Luke's drawings got better, more color, more detail. He liked to tape them on the wall above the hearth. One afternoon, he handed Anya a new one. 3 figures again, but this time they weren't stick people. There were clothes, eyes, a garden. One person in a long dress, her hands holding the other 2. Anya smiled. "Who's this one?" "That's you," Luke said. "I wrote it there." Below the figure, scrawled in his best effort, "Mommy, Anya." Looked down at the paper for a long time. Then she pulled Luke into her arms and held him. Not tight, just firm enough that he knew. Her eyes shimmered, but she didn't cry. He hugged her back and didn't ask why her voice trembled when she whispered, "Thank you, little bear." That night, Jacob placed the carved spoon on her pillow. He didn't leave a note. He didn't wait to see her find it. Just left it there, smoothed and warm from his hand. Anya found it after her bath. She picked it up like it was an heirloom, pressed it to her cheek. Then, smiling to herself, she turned off the lamp, and in the quiet, in the almost spring, in the house that had lost and gained and changed, something bloomed that no one could name. Not yet, but it was real, and it was growing. The wedding wasn't planned in any traditional way. There were no invitations, no white linens, no distant relatives buzzing in to offer commentary or tears. Just 3 people, a patch of land softened by spring, and the kind of sky that holds its breath for something sacred. They chose the garden. It had been Luke's idea. "We should get married where the beans live," he'd said, dead serious as he held a watering can too big for his arms. Anya had laughed, not to dismiss, but because it was beautiful. And Jacob, staring at her across the raised beds with dirt beneath his nails and awe in his chest, nodded. "Yes," he said, "right here." They waited for the ground to be warm. On the day itself, Luke scattered petals from an old tin bucket. They fluttered through the air like colored snow, landing on the tilled earth and in Anya's hair. She wore the same dress from the train station, mended at the hem, pressed with love. Jacob wore his father's old jacket. It was too short in the arms, but it smelled like home. They didn't say vows aloud. Instead, Jacob brought a sapling. From the edge of the forest, a young birch, the kind Anya had once told Luke grew in her village too. They planted it together, hands in soil, hearts in sync. Rings came after, simple silver bands Jacob had shaped himself, engraved with one word each, still and here. Luke clapped as they stood, hands muddy, eyes wet. Then he threw a fistful of extra petals into the air and yelled, "You're married now?" They laughed. Not big belly laughs, but quiet ones, full of weight and wonder, and the birch tree swayed gently behind them, roots pressing into the same earth where a little boy had once said, "That one's for us." A few days later, Luke was digging through a box of Anya's things looking for a colored pencil. He found the letter instead. It wasn't sealed, just folded, yellowed at the edges, the creases soft from being held and hidden. He brought it to her first. "What's this?" he asked. Anya blinked, recognizing the paper before she touched it. She sat down slowly, her face unreadable. Jacob walked in moments later, drying his hands from the pump outside. Luke handed him the letter. "I think it's important," he said, solemn. Jacob read it slowly. "If I go, they may heal. But if I stay, maybe I can help them remember how to hope." His breath caught. He looked at her, the woman who'd shown up at his door with a suitcase and a letter, who'd turned bread and earth into home, who had stayed. Anya didn't speak. Jacob didn't ask her to. Instead, he folded the letter back, crisp and careful. He walked to the mantel where his late wife's photo sat, still in its wooden frame, still catching light at just the right angle, and beside it he placed Anya's letter, not as a replacement, but a continuation, a joining. Of pages in the same book, Luke, watching silently, slipped his hand into Anya's and didn't let go. That night, it rained softly, the kind of rain that barely taps the windows, the kind that makes the world feel wrapped in cotton. They sat by the fireplace, just as they had months ago, when everything was new and uncertain. But now, the fire was gentle, steady, like a heartbeat. Luke climbed into Anya's lap, curling, to her like a cat. He leaned his head against her collarbone, thumb in his mouth. "Mommy," he whispered. She didn't respond right away, just wrapped her arms around him, pressing her face to his hair. Tears welled, not from pain, but something deeper, something like being seen. She kissed his forehead. "I hear you, little bear," she murmured. Jacob, watching from his chair, said nothing, but the corner of his mouth lifted, not a smile, not quite, just a piece he hadn't worn in years. Later, long after Luke was tucked beneath the quilt, breath slow and even, Anya stepped to the porch. The rain had stopped. The air smelled of wet leaves and turned soil. Jacob joined her, quiet as ever. He stood beside her, not touching, just present. And then, simple, sure, he reached down and took her hand. No words, just the gesture. Her fingers tightened slightly. The birch tree swayed in the breeze, its slender branches reaching up like it believed in something. A bird landed near the top, small, brown, unremarkable, but beautiful in the way all beginnings are. In a home built of silence and second chances, a whisper was all it took to begin again. If this story touched you, subscribe or share where you're watching from. These stories matter.